Filipinos are now homebound. This after President Duterte orders their immediate discharge, giving government agencies 1 week to send them to their provinces. A non-profit group wants to legalize and decriminalize prostitution in the country. That's to make sex workers eligible for government aid amid the ongoing health crisis. With ABS-CBN's franchise bid in Congress back to square one, the network's rank-and-file employees' union is eyeing to ask the Supreme Court to issue a temporary restraining order against a cease and desist order by the NTC. And the Bureau of Internal Revenue says no more extension for the deadline of tax filing and payments as the government scrambles to get more funding for the country's COVID-19 fight. Thousands of stranded OFWs are finally heading back to their provinces after weeks or even months of mandatory quarantine. This comes after President Duterte ordered the sending home of repatriated Filipinos who have undergone prolonged quarantine at various ships and hotels in Metro Manila. The Overseas Workers Welfare Administration also appeals to LGUs to allow the workers to go straight to their homes instead of undergoing another 14-day isolation in local quarantine sites. Del De Vera tells us more.
President Duterte has ordered the sending home of some 24,000 OFWs who have undergone weeks of quarantine at various ships and hotels in Metro Manila. Presidential spokesperson Harry Roque says the chief executive agrees with the mandatory testing of OFWs, but it should not be taking too long. He adds that the president is calling for a boost in PCR-based testing in provinces for the benefit of returning overseas workers. The Labor Department meanwhile says 8,000 workers will be sent home daily via land and air transport in the next 3 days. According to Labor Secretary Silvestre Bello III, starting today, bus trips to Bicol, Ilocos, Cagayan Valley, Car, and Central Luzon will be available. Flights to Cagayan de Oro, Tacloban, Bacolod, Davao, Cebu, Iloilo, and Zamboanga will likewise be arranged. For its part, the Parañaque Integrated Terminal Exchange or PTEX have prepared bus fleets to accommodate the returning workers.
Ipinangako natin sa lahat ng mga pumunta dito na hindi matatapos itong araw na to kung kakailanganing ipahatid, maski nag-iisa, pahatid ang isang nahuhuling OFW kung kakailanganin. Kailangan cleared out ito.
With this, the OWA is asking LGUs to allow OFWs to go straight to their homes instead of undergoing a separate 14-day isolation in local quarantine facilities. So far, at least 17,000 returning OFWs have tested negative for the disease.
Masarap kasi nakalaya na eh. Nakauwi ka na. Matagal din kami sa dagat eh. Wala tayong magagawa eh. Nasa crisis ang ano eh.
For News 5, Dale De Vera, we're One News.
Repatriated OFWs also filled the Ninoy Aquino International Airport as they were given the green light to return to their provinces after being quarantined. Gerard de la Peña with the story.
The Ninoy Aquino International Airport was once again filled with passengers after more than 2 months of quarantine. But this time, passengers are overseas Filipino workers on their way to their home provinces after being stranded in Metro Manila for weeks and some even months. For Edward, who works in Kuwait, he wouldn't mind 2 more weeks of quarantine when he gets to Catbalogan, Samar, as long as he gets to be with his family.
Excited. Siyempre, makakapiling na namin yung pamilya pero hindi pa pala. Kasi may protocol pa sa Calbayog City na 14 days quarantine pa daw ulit. Pero hindi naman ako nagano kasi nasanay na rin. Kumbaga, naghintay nga, nagtiis ng 1 buwan. Di, yung 14 days, ano pa ba't hintayin ko na lang basta makauwi lang ng ligtas.
The Overseas Workers Welfare Administration and the Philippine Coast Guard ferried the OFWs from their hotel to the airport. The process was not clear at first, as the repatriated Filipinos came to the airport without any flight schedules. But the process was fairly easy for OFWs like Mike, who's going home to Bacolod after 2 months of staying in Manila.
Kasi yung manning agency tumawag sa amin na pipila daw kami rito kasi merong free flights na yung Coast Guard. Kung mayroon kang certificate na sa swab test, pwede ka daw dito. Kaya kami sinubukan na namin.
Social distancing was forgotten at times, but the airport authorities made sure that crowding will be avoided.
Social distancing is strictly enforced here at the airport. As you can see, some seats are covered so that passengers will not be sitting right beside each other while waiting for their flights.
Authorities said sending thousands of OFWs home in a flash is not without challenges.
Ang challenge is, well, as you said, the volume, again, yung calibration ng pagdadala dito, yung food, yung flights, making sure na everybody goes on board. Merong isang grupo doon na bukas pa daw yung flight nila, mga taga Dumaguete. So we will help them. We will most likely billet them overnight in a hotel.
On Monday, they managed to fly out around 3,500 OFWs to their hometowns. The government is confident that they will be able to send home the remaining 24,000 OFWs within the week. For News 5, Gerard de la Peña, we are One News.
COVID-19 cases in the Philippines still continue to rise. The good news, more patients have recovered as well. The Health Department reports 284 new coronavirus infections today, May 25th. The sick list has grown to more than 14,000. 5 persons, meanwhile, died today, raising the death count to 873. And 74 patients recovered from the SARS-like disease overnight. So far, more than 3,300 patients have survived COVID-19 in the country. The Private Hospitals Association of the Philippines has called on President Duterte to replace PhilHealth Chairman and Health Secretary Francisco Duque III. In a letter addressed to the President, the group says most hospitals are now financially drained as they are still waiting for the promised interim reimbursement mechanism or IRM for COVID-19 testing. The organization's president, Rustico Jimenez, appealed to the president to replace Duque with someone who can do better in addressing the country's health crisis. A report from the Philippine Star earlier said that the president is scouting for Duque's replacement amid calls for his resignation. Presidential spokesman Harry Roque, however, stressed that while Duque remains as a cabinet member, he enjoys the full trust of the chief executive. 14 mayors from the Metro Manila Council has agreed to shift to a general community quarantine for the National Capital Region by June 1. Parañaque Mayor Edwin Olivares, who is also the chairperson of the MMC, says majority of the council, including him, support the shifting to GCQ. He adds others who agreed include Valenzuela Mayor Rex Gatchalian and Navotas Mayor Toby Chanco. Currently, Metro Manila is under a modified enhanced community quarantine, which is set until the end of the month. We'll pause for a short break, but when the big story returns, a non-profit organization wants to legalize and decriminalize prostitution in the country to make sex workers eligible for government aid amid the ongoing health crisis. And meet Quezon City's 90-year-old Super Lola, a cancer survivor who recently won her battle against COVID-19. Keep it here on One News for more big stories. I'm Jess De Los Santos and you're watching The Big Story. The House Committee on Legislative Franchises will begin its formal deliberations on ABS-CBN's franchise renewal bid tomorrow. And with the lower chamber back to square one after House leaders dropped the temporary franchise bill, the network's employees union has decided to take action and formally appeal to lawmakers and even to the Supreme Court. Ria Fernandez joins us with the details. Ria, like what we mentioned earlier, it's all back to square one. What are we expecting on tomorrow's House panel deliberations?
Just it's becoming more difficult for thousands of ABS-CBN employees as the network is still off-air on free TV and radio broadcasts. Despite this, they remain hopeful that the Supreme Court will issue a temporary restraining order against the move of the National Telecommunications Commission. ABS-CBN Rank and File Employees Union President John Villanueva says the group is planning to file a similar appeal with hopes that the High Court would act on it before August. ABS-CBN President and CEO Carlo Katigbak has earlier confessed to senators of possible retrenchment in more or less 2 months if they fail to resume operations soon. Let's listen to the interview.
Ngayon, sobrang lungkot po talaga. Hindi nila maintindihan kung bakit nangyayari ngayon ito eh. Kasi ang alam ko, ang gobyerno dapat dinadagdagan yung mga trabaho, pero ang nangyayari ngayon parang binabawasan pa yung mga may trabaho eh.
While waiting, the group launched last Friday an online petition calling for support to ABS-CBN's franchise renewal. And in just 24 hours, they were able to gather over 1 million signatures. Villanueva says they will submit the petition to the House of Representatives, but not as soon as tomorrow afternoon when the Legislative Franchises Committee begins formal deliberations on the network's franchise bill. He says they want to see first how things will roll at the lower chamber. Just the House panel is also set to tackle the alleged violations of ABS-CBN together with the House Committee on Good Government and Public Accountability. Jess?
All right, Ria, the possibility of retrenchment still looming over ABS-CBN employees here. Question now is how soon can the House Committee on Legislative Franchises finish their hearings? Will this actually make it in time before the new Congress, before the President actually makes his fifth State of the Nation address in July?
I think if we're going to think about the hearings conducted for the ABS-CBN franchise, as mentioned earlier by Speaker Alan Cayetano, before the fifth State of the Nation address of the President in July, definitely they're done with these ABS-CBN franchise hearings. So by August they will be ready to decide on the matter. But if your question is, can they go back on air by that time because they will be issued with a provision or with a franchise already? The answer is no, because considering the legislative process of the Congress, if ever it secures successfully a franchise from the lower chamber, we must understand that it still has to hurdle the Senate and, of course, the office of the President, unless our Congress leaders really push for it now with a hard deadline.
Does this mean, Ria, that things are looking bleak for ABS-CBN to actually go back on air by August?
If we're going to depend on the actions of the Congress, my answer is yes. That is the reason why our employees at ABS-CBN are now appealing to the Supreme Court to issue a temporary restraining order against the cease and desist order of the National Telecommunications Commission, because they believe that is the most immediate relief so that they can go back on air immediately.
All right, thank you for those updates, Ria Fernandez. A non-profit organization recommends to legalize and decriminalize prostitution in the country. In an interview with 1PH, Mara Quesada, Executive Director of Action for Health Initiatives or ACHIEVE, explained that the move would provide benefits and assistance for sex workers. Quesada notes that sex workers have lost their source of income and have been displaced due to the ongoing health crisis.
yung nature ng ating mga ayuda na pinoprovide sa ating mga kababayan ngayon, particularly yung mga recovery programs ng DOLE, hindi naman sila papasok doon because they're not recognized as workers, no? But if they were, then they would be able to benefit as well.
These are the other big stories today. The Tourism Department releases its new normal guidelines for accommodation establishments. Tourists will now be required to fill out health declaration forms upon checking in hotels, while all payments shall be made online. The DOT also imposes limits on the number of room occupants, strict disinfection procedures, and other safety protocols. The order shall apply to all accommodation establishments in areas where a community quarantine is no longer in place. The Philippine National Police is still validating reports of sexual abuse involving police officers. In a text message, PNP spokesperson Bernard Banac says the PNP has not yet received formal complaints that would substantiate the allegations. PNP Chief Archie Gamboa earlier urged concerned parties to come forward and file charges against alleged erring policemen. The Department of Agriculture is eyeing to participate in the UK's clinical trials for a possible vaccine for African swine fever. The DA says a vaccine could help prevent potential shortage of pork supply and eventually push down retail prices. Shaila Francisco with the details.
The Department of Agriculture is pushing for the Philippines to participate in clinical trials for a potential African swine fever vaccine. This comes after Pierre Bright Institute in the United Kingdom confirmed that 100% of pigs vaccinated survived a lethal dose of ASF virus. Agriculture Secretary William Dorr says they are planning to write a formal communication to UK to express its interest in participating in the tests. Dorr also confirmed that the Bureau of Animal Industry, through the Agriculture Attaché in Washington, has indicated its willingness to participate in the trials for another ASF vaccine being developed in the US. In the Philippines, ASF has affected 2.2% of the country's 12.8 million hog population. The DA says the vaccine could help the country to prevent a potential shortage of pork supply of 43 days by the end of the year.
Now, kung talagang effective itong vaccine, di marami na rin pabalik sa hog industry mag-invest. So we can recover in the next, say, 6 months, 7 months.
Currently, pork prices have gone up by 10 to 20 pesos in Muñoz Market in Quezon City, with vendors saying prices from suppliers have continuously increased due to ASF.
Nagre-reklamo din yung mga customer namin bakit tumaas. Medyo nahirapan din kami mag-adjust.
Meanwhile, aside from pork, chicken prices also went up by 10 pesos. Vegetables from Baguio have increased by 10 to 40 pesos, with crops affected by Typhoon Ambo. Latest data from the DA shows high-value crops remain the most affected commodity, with fruit and vegetable losses amounting to over 300 million pesos.
Kumonti ang mga naka-apekto rin yung gulay, yung presyo natin.
The department says it is now monitoring prices of chicken and vegetables as they receive complaints of increase in other markets as well.
Titingnan namin kung ano ang naging factors that affected the price ng retail. Kung hindi ho masyadong gumalaw ang farm gate, dapat hindi din gumagalaw ang retail price.
They are now looking to bringing more produce from other sources to bring down prices in wet markets. Shaila Francisco, we are One News.
We'll be back with more big stories after the break. Stay with us here on One News. In an interview with 1PH, BIR spokesperson Marisa Cabreros says tax collections dropped due to enforced lockdown measures. Cabreros adds that the government needs funding for its fight against COVID-19. She also reminded taxpayers to settle their dues as soon as possible.
Kailangan din po nating tulungan ng ating gobyerno. Kailangan po ng koleksyon kasi para po may pangtustos sa mga measures against COVID-19. Halos deferred na po ng 2 buwan ng payment ng income tax. So talagang bumagsak po ang koleksyon ng BIR.
The Land Transportation Office admits it is not yet ready to fully implement the much-criticized doble placa law. In an interview with 1PH, LTO Executive Director Attorney Romeo Vera Cruz says only doable provisions in the law's implementing rules will initially be imposed. Last week, the agency released the IRR for doble placa, which requires motorcycles to have bigger metal plates and stickers in a bid to crack down on riding in tandem criminals. However, Cruz admits that the plates are not yet available. He assures motorcycle owners that they will be given, quote, very sufficient time to comply. As for the backlash from the riding community, the LTO official says the move should not be a cause for concern. He says the agency acknowledges the challenges posed by the ongoing pandemic. Let's take a look at the COVID-19 situation in other badly hit countries. The White House restricts travel from Brazil to the United States after the South American nation recently became the world's second COVID-19 hotspot. The ban will come into force on May 28th, prohibiting most non-U.S. citizens from traveling to the U.S. if they had been in Brazil in the last 2 weeks. Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro has yet to respond to the move. On May 22, Brazil became second to the U.S. with the most number of COVID-19 cases worldwide at over 300,000, surpassing Russia. Brazil's coronavirus death toll has also reached over 21,000, according to the health ministry. Meanwhile, things are slowly getting better in Italy, one of the worst hit countries by the pandemic. Beaches are getting a facelift as the country braces for the reopening of its tourist spots this month. Umbrellas will be far apart and tables at restaurants have been lessened as part of the new normal. Italy on Sunday recorded 50 new COVID-19 deaths, its lowest daily death toll since March 7. A fundraising initiative by the Philippine Disaster Resilience Foundation, among others, has received almost 92 million pesos in cash and 27 million pesos worth of in-kind donations. The donations for the group's Project Kaagapay has reached 70 hospitals and medical centers in Metro Manila and other provinces. Over 200,000 personal protective equipment sets were also distributed to beneficiaries. The PDRF is co-chaired by Manny V. Panglinan, who is also the chairman of Signal TV. We end tonight's newscast with a 90-year-old cancer survivor who also managed to beat COVID-19 after over 40 days of isolation in a hospital in Quezon City. Meet the patient who was dubbed as Super Lola. Camille Samonte tells us her story.
Cheers and applause from health workers greeted 90-year-old Natalia Vicente as she was pushed in a wheelchair out of the hospital after recovering from COVID-19. She was hospitalized on April 6 because of pneumonia. A few days later, she tested positive for COVID-19.
Yung hirap ng dinanas ko, hindi ko po alam kung paano nangyari sa akin yun. Na hirap ako talagang huminga. Kanya parang ako nawala sa sarili na nun talaga sa hirap.
Natalia spent 44 days in the hospital where she had been isolated from her family.
Mahirap kasi syempre yun nga mag-isa lang siya sa ospital, ganun. Sinong tutulong sa kanya yun yung nasa isip namin. Yun, tas hindi pa siya marunong mag-cellphone, telephone lang.
Natalia is no stranger when it comes to fighting diseases. In 2013, she survived colon cancer, and Natalia proved herself a warrior once again by beating COVID-19. Natalia also has words of encouragement for anyone in the same battle.
Magtiyaga-tiyaga lang po sila, magdasal, umasang makikita pa niya ang kanyang mga kapamilyang katulad ko.
For News 5, Camille Samonte, we are One News.
And that wraps up today's big story. Catch us again tomorrow at 8 p.m. on Signal Channels 8 and 250. Please like our Facebook page, One News. For more in-depth analysis, visit our webpage, onenews.ph. I'm Jess De Los Santos. We are One News. Good evening.